Alright, well stop me if you heard this one, but GPU prices are out of control right now. But I know a lot of you guys are ready to build gaming PCs or just tired of waiting, and with Nvidia's announcement lately, it doesn't look like it's getting any better anytime soon. So today I brought you 5 GPUs that you can use that will not break the bank so much, but will get you by and actually allow you to do 1080p gaming while you wait for graphics card prices to either come down or maybe get picked up in the EVGA or get lucky on the Newegg Shuffle, or do some shady stuff behind a dumpster in an alleyway. And if you stick around to the end, I've got a bonus option for you. Alright, so the first card on the list is the GTX 960, the 4GB model. This card is currently selling for about $125 to $150 on eBay, and it was released back in January of 2015. Now this card sports 1024 cores, which is pretty lackluster by today's standards, and it has a base clock of 1127 MHz and boosts up to 1178 MHz. Once again, pretty lackluster by today's standards. However, this card can get you by, especially if you're playing esports titles like Fortnite or Rainbow Six Siege, and it can also do some light 1080p gaming on low settings if you wanted to run something like Red Dead Redemption 2 or maybe Borderlands 3, something like that. Though keep in mind, you're probably going to be closer to like 40 frames per second instead of the 60 frames, but a lot of those games are still very playable at that frame rate. And if you're looking for what kind of CPU, if you wanted to use this for an actual gaming PC right now, probably something like a Ryzen 1600 would be a good pairing for it, or maybe a 9400 or a 10100 over on the Intel side. Basically something, either an older 6-core or maybe a newer 4-core or 4-core 8-thread. Now keep in mind, you could go higher if you wanted to go like a 10600 or a 3600, something like that, from either Intel or AMD. But your GPU is going to bottleneck your CPU performance, so just kind of keep that in mind if you're going for a higher end CPU to go with this graphics card. Now if you can spend a little bit more, I would actually recommend the second card on this list, which is the GTX 970. That's right, the 4GB variant of the big brother of the GTX 960 was released in June of 2014. Now this card sports the same 4GB VRAM buffer of the GTX 960, but it has 1664 CUDA cores, as well as a base frequency of 1050 MHz and a boost frequency of 1178 MHz. Now this card is great for 1080p gaming. Most esports titles are somewhere in between the esports and the AAA titles. I don't know what we're calling those titles. Non-esports, non-AA titles? Is it baseball? So you can get away with playing things like Apex Legends or Warzone that need a little bit more horsepower, but still are kind of that next tier down from things like Borderlands 3, Cyberpunk 2077, Red Dead Redemption 2, games like that that really require more demanding hardware. Though keep in mind, you could drop down resolution a bit or just turn everything way down to low and still get respectable frame rates in those games. They're not competitive shooters, so you don't need to maintain 100 FPS at all times. Now the third card on this list, I really had trouble recommending, but I figured I had to put it on the list, and that is the 1050 Ti. Now do not go out and buy a brand new 1050 Ti that's currently retailing for about $300 to $350. My local Micro Center had a ton of them for $300, and as much as I love Micro Center, I hope they don't sell those cards because they are grossly overpriced at $300. Now I checked eBay, and I would actually go for a 970 because on eBay the 1050 Ti's are actually selling for about the same price, somewhere between $150 and $200. Some are way over that, but pretty much kind of an average is $150 to $200. And at that price I would pick a 970 over a 1050 Ti, except for one scenario, and that one scenario is why it's on the list right now. So if you're doing an office PC flip that you're trying to turn into a cheap gaming PC, the 1050 Ti is actually a very good option for you. It'll usually keep up with those 3rd and 4th gen Intel processors, as well as it does not require external power. Now a GTX 970 is going to require at least a 6-pin, some variants have 8-pin power connections on them, but you'll need some kind of power connection or a converter, which means you're either buying an extra cable or you're having to replace the power supply altogether. Now if you purchase a 1050 Ti, you don't have to buy any of that. You could just slap the card in there, and keep in mind it is going to struggle more with games like Warzone, Apex Legends, things of that nature than a 960 or 970 would, but it's a dedicated graphics card and it will get you by. And that brings us to card number 4 on the list, which is the RX 570 4GB model. Now the RX 570 and 580 4GB models have actually been selling for about $250, $225, $275, $250 to $300, somewhere in there, but certainly less than $300. And they're really good cards. They can still play all the modern titles at 1080p. You may have to lower the settings down to lower medium for things like Cyberpunk and Red Dead Redemption 2. But you get a fantastic gaming experience from a card that really is older because of the 4GB VRAM buffer, but still does very well. Now this card was released in 2017, making it one of the newer cards on the list. It has 2048 cores, which keep in mind are AMD cards in their cores, so they're not the CUDA cores that we've been referencing, but somehow the translation is supposed to work for it. And it does have a base clock of 1168 MHz and a boost clock of about 1275 MHz, depending on which model you get. Now this card actually pairs very well with an Intel i5-10400 or an AMD 3600, and I've done some benchmarking on that, and you can check out those videos linked in the description below, and if I remember I'll put it up here somewhere. And the final card on the list is the GTX 1660. Now I like this card because it was actually released newer than the rest of the cards, obviously, which is why it's so expensive, but it was released in March of 2019, and it actually has a 6GB VRAM buffer. Now 6 gigs over 4 gigs doesn't sound like a lot, and really it's not, but in games like Warzone, Cyberpunk, some of the more demanding games, having that extra VRAM buffer is going to allow you to actually turn up some of the textures and make the games look a little bit better. Now in addition to the 6GB VRAM buffer, you've also got 1408 CUDA cores, as well as a 1550 MHz base clock and a 1735 MHz boost clock, once again depending on the model that you get. So once again, this is going to play all of your titles at 1080p without any issues, but in addition, you can actually play some of these games at 1440p and still maintain high refresh rates. Now keep in mind, this card is $350, making it the most expensive card on the list, but it's also more expensive than a brand new RTX 3060, and not much cheaper than a brand new RTX 3060 Ti. However, if you can't find anything in the EVGA queue system, or line up at a Micro Center, or get lucky in the shuffle and you're just tired of waiting, this card will get you by. Alright, so the last card on the list is actually the 5600G, which is a CPU, well, technically it's an APU because it has graphics installed. But anyway, so the 5600G is actually getting pretty good reviews for gaming, especially in things like esports titles like CSGO, Rainbow Six Siege, Fortnite, etc. Now the 56G, outside of some cache, is actually about the same processor as the 5600X. So if you're planning on building a system with the 5600X and you just wanted to hold off until you could find an actual dedicated GPU, you may want to actually consider the 5600G at $259 and then pair it with a graphics card later, knowing that you can still play some games now. Alright everyone, so let me know what you thought about the list in the comment section down below. If you liked this and it was helpful, leave a like and consider subscribing. If you didn't, press the dislike button twice to make sure that you really let everyone know. And as always guys, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next video.